Good evening and welcome. My name is Christopher Ram, and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of OGGN to this official podcast on Oil and Gas Governance Network. Our topic for today is Gas is not oil, gas development without a plan, ? And to discuss this matter with us this afternoon is Anthony Paul, Senior Energy Policy and Strategy Advisor. For those of you who are listening to this program the first time, you will know that OGGN was founded in the summer of 2017. It's made up of Guyanese at home and abroad. It's registered as a nonprofit in New York. It recognizes the prominence of oil at this stage in the trajectory of Guyana as a nation and why it will be so for many, many decades to come. OGGN is committed to long-term thinking, so maybe it's good and very appropriate that we have a strategy advisor in the person of Anthony Paul to talk with us this evening. Anthony, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. And it's a pleasure to be with you once again and a pleasure to be on Kaichi News and with OGGN. Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the gist of our discussion this afternoon, I wonder if you can tell us your own background and history in this particular area, because I think you're considered quite a regional expert in this matter, though I know you don't like the word expert.
It's a term that's often used too much. So my background, Christopher, and again, thanks for having me, is I am by training and experience a geologist, a geophysicist, very practical background. I worked with my own government here in Trinidad and Tobago. I was born and grew up. I worked as Director of Geology and Geophysics, running exploration, licensing, overseeing exploration, and so on, contracts. I also work at Petrotrin, the state company. I worked with Amoco as exploration manager when we were finding these big gas fields in the late 90s. Then BP merged with Amoco, and I joined BP and went to London in strategy and worked on digital strategy for BP. And that actually got me to understand something quite distinct, that in countries like ours, where the operations are, we really do a good job understanding the operations, but we know very little about the business. We know very little about where the value is in oil and gas. When I came back home, I continued working for BP in managing our oil fields that were aging. And then I got involved in developing our gas fields and understanding where the value was in gas. And my mission, the assignment I was given, was how can Trinidad and Tobago benefit more from gas? Why was that important? Because as you may know, Trinidad had a long history of oil and gas, over 100 years of refining, over 50 years of natural gas to fertilizers and power. So LNG, where we entered, was the first time in Trinidad's history we were exporting raw materials from oil and gas instead of adding value. So the company was faced with a challenge. How do you create more value in Trinidad? And that's where I developed BP's procurement strategy, which focused on putting more value into the supply chain locally so that Trinidad can capture value that way. And that work helped me understand two things: how governments think and see the world and understand value, and then how companies see it. And what struck me was the asymmetry between companies and governments. And after 25 years working in the industry, I said, you know what? I will go out on my own and share what I know with my own people, which I did in Trinidad and Tobago, and wrote things like our local content policy. And then that work was captured internationally. I got invited people like the World Bank, the UNDP, to visit countries who are new to oil and gas, either had a recent discovery or about to enter oil and gas because they signed a contract with a company and don't know what to do about it. And the work was, what does the government need to do? How can they prepare them? So I help governments build strategies, build policies, build institutions, train people, build systems and procedures. One of them, as you may know, is working with Guyana. When Guyana discovered oil in 2015, the UNDP invited me to support Guyana in a forum in October 2015. And out of that, I did a piece of work for the then minister on assessing Guyana's readiness to manage the sector. And then beyond that, I did something around local content. And I've done similar things in Ghana, Mozambique, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and in a few places, basically bringing lessons learned from the industry to help other countries understand where the value is and capture more. And that's the work I do, Chris.
Thank you very much. Therefore, we're privileged to have you. You mentioned the term just now, asymmetry between the government and the company. Your experience with Guyana, its relationship, the 2016 agreement, and the government and the management by the government. Would you say there is an asymmetry?
Absolutely. And in fact, when I did that first,
and what are the consequences of that asymmetry?
So the consequences is the distribution of value. Who gets the value from Guyana's oil and gas? Who retains it? Where does it go? And the value is not just revenue. Revenue is a big part of it, of course. Is the other value in terms of what can Guyana build by having got involved in the oil and gas sector in one, managing it, managing the pace at which oil and gas are developed, how they're used, how these services are employed, how Guyanese build capacity to support it, and then take that capacity to other sectors. So the consequence is that Guyana's expectations are heightened, of course, as it should be. But the question is, will the reality come home? And more importantly to me, is this oil and gas under Guyana's territorial waters is high value asset. It's part of Guyana's natural resources, the asset base. When those are taken away, Christopher, they're gone forever. The question is, how does Guyana use that so that future generations who didn't have a chance to share in this windfall, as it were, can benefit from it? And that, to me, is where the work I did and the work I do focuses. How do we extract value for today and for future generations? And that, to me, is the consequence of that asymmetry, if you're not managing the contractors well enough.
Well, you talk about the asymmetry between the contractors and the government and the state. There's a widespread dissatisfaction, justifiable or not justifiable. The state, the people of this country, I am included, do not believe that the government is operating in the best interests of the people. Would you say, from your own experiences, that there's an asymmetry between the government and the people's expectations in relation to the Exxon and his partners' relationship with Guyana?
And that's a good point. And getting to the heart of the matter, which I deal, which is good governance. And good governance really should say, are you conducting your activities in a way that benefits your stakeholders, those to whom you report or to whom you owe your job, in the best way to suit them, in their best interests? And good governance, Christopher, requires two things. It requires transparency. In other words, what did you do? Why did you do it? How did you do it? What are the outcomes? And it requires accountability. In other words, how do I know you did that? Who made those choices? And what can I do about it? And those two things, transparency, accountability, are the backbone of good governance. Now, early on, I refer back to that work I did. That was one of the things I emphasized. And one of the things I put in place, or I asked to put in place, is that there is in Guyana Constitution a requirement for parliamentary committees, joint committees, to oversee things like the economy, natural resources. And one of those was put in place and used at one point, but it hasn't been used since then. That, to me, is where transparency can really take a leapfrog. Now, Guyana did a job putting contracts online at one point, but are other things available? And that's the question. So can Guyanese question the decisions being made and be satisfied that they are being made, as I said, in Guyana's best interest?
Well, let me give you one particular example, one particular case, and you tell me whether you think there's transparency. It's been years now since we've heard about our reserves being, 11 point something billion. It seems to have stood there despite announcements of new find. Is there either transparency or accountability in this case?
So, first of all, we have to be careful when people use numbers about reserves.
These are their numbers. These are their numbers.
No, I know. So, to be fair, when the numbers came out, from time to time, they would say recoverable reserves. That makes a big difference. That is quite significant. It means that's what we can get out to the ground. Right? Now, companies cannot declare commercial natural gas reserves unless they are have an approved project.
But Tony, isn't it for them to say that? Isn't it? Must they not be consistent with what they've said from throughout the life of this experience?
So there's two things. One, companies need to have audited reserves numbers done by a third-party independent auditor to be able to declare those as part of their assets, especially if their shares are on the stock exchanges or they borrow public funds in the US, for instance. So that is clear. The question now is, what does the government do? A government has a responsibility to understand what its resources are. In other words, governments borrow from banks. When they borrow, those banks want to know, what is your asset base? What am I lending you against? Governments own the reserves. The reserves under the ground don't belong to the companies. They only take custody when it comes to the surface. It belongs to the state. Now, the question is, does the government do its own audits? Or does the government require
Can you answer that question from your experience? Does the government do its own audit in terms of the technical aspects, not the financial aspects?
So in Trinidad, the government does. In Guyana, I don't know that they do. Now, governments...
To the best of your knowledge, they don't. You're not aware that they do.
Yeah. Now, having said that, the government has a simple task in saying, I need you to have an independent audit done, you operator, and I need to see that independent audit. So the government doesn't have to pay for it. They can say, as a contractor to me, every penny you spend, I pay for. I therefore have a right to see every contract you've used to make sure I'm getting value for money. And I need to see the product from those contracts. The government has the right to ask that. They may not do it, but they have the right to do that.
So there's my question, do you think there's sufficient transparency and accountability in regard to petroleum? And my next question then, whether there's any transparency at all in terms of the gas resources, Tony?
Sure. So to finish the question that you asked was, many years ago, there was a declaration of 11 billion cubic feet. And you've heard discovery after discovery then, and you haven't heard the number change.
11 billion barrels.
Billion barrels of oil equivalent, which is oil and gas. As I understand it, 25% is gas, which is about 17 trillion cubic feet of gas. Now, what that means potentially is that, yes, discoveries have been made, but they haven't moved the needle in terms of billions of barrels. So there might have been discoveries of 100 million, 200 million, I don't know, right? That is a question that the government should answer. As a country,
and that's a transparency and accountability issue, isn't it?
Yes. What is the current value or volume of oil and gas proven through drill wells? Yeah, go ahead.
Let me shift direction slightly, and we'll come back to the gas, etc. The Court of Appeal of Guyana has just overturned a decision by a judge of the High Court concerning the bond, the insurance bond, and that has created a lot of concerns about Guyana. In fact, you must know about Dr. Vincent Adams, who has argued very strongly that without a legally enforceable parent company guarantee, we can face catastrophic environmental and financial exposure. And quite frankly, because of the close situation of these wells, a problem with one could affect the entire playing field. What's your view of Dr. Adams' concerns?
Let me say a couple of things. One, first of all, let me avoid pretending to give a legal judgment. I can't do that, But from a governance standpoint, the issue is clear, right? The state must know who ultimately pays if there's a catastrophe offshore. Now, in oil and gas, in environmental issues, it's very clear the polluter pays. Now, the question really is, how does a country get a polluter to pay? And the deeper issue there is not only the guarantee, the deeper issue is institutional asymmetry. The same thing I mentioned, Exxon, Hess, CNOC, or Chevron now, they have world-class lawyers, world-class engineers, insurers, risk modelers, negotiators. Guyana must have, in the EPA and the petroleum regulator, the Ministry of Natural Resources, must have technically strong, financially independent and legally confident, and importantly, politically protected individuals, institutions, and systems. If the public is to rely on court battles to establish to protect the basic risk, then the regulatory architecture must be there. And it's not there. Now, to go a little bit further, there are other mechanisms the state can put in place to get some protection. And for instance, what people have used are insurance. The company must have insurance, right? Secondly, they may also call for bonds, and a bond might be some instrument where the government can draw down on it. Those are the mechanisms. One of the things that Guyana faces, and most countries like that face, is the issue of thin capitalization. The entity involved here is the local company, Esso Guyana.
There is not even there is not, if I may correct you, please, there is not even a local company. This is a branch of an external company, which is a branch of some other thing. It takes about 3 steps to get to Exxon and Houston.
Right. So the licensee, as far as I understand, in most jurisdictions, must have a legally registered entity, right? That entity might be Esso Guyana. But like I said, those companies have very little asset base. They have nothing. And I've seen in Trinidad where large international companies have come, own the suppliers' money, leave, don't pay them, and even if you sue them, you have nothing to get because there's no parent company guarantee, there's no bond. And that's the reason that countries will require an instrument that is more powerful than the asset base of the operating company. But that might not be able to cover the liability from a catastrophic event. So I understand the rationale for people wanting it. I understand why the court might decide one way, but I think Guyana should seek other opportunities, other options to cover that gap.
But are you suggesting that that you said you understand the rationale?
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that you think that Dr. Adams' concern about catastrophic consequences is going overboard? Or
not at all. What I'm saying is that I can't judge on the court's judgment. The court might say that. What I'm saying is that if the court determines that option isn't available, I think Guyana should seek different options, which include bonds or insurance, right? Something that is tangible, that the government can draw upon, and that is not unreasonable, I don't think.
Now, some of this comes out of the petroleum agreement signed in 2016, which, for all intents and purposes, is a 1999 agreement signed by then President Janet Jagan under a very antiquated Petroleum Exploration and Production Act of 1986. Do you think, as you know, I'm presuming you know, that this contract provides for renegotiation? It unambiguously does, condition yes, obviously the parties have to agree.
Right.
Are you in favor, and given your own experiences, do you believe the government's position, look, sanctity of contract is a rational response, is a patriotic response to dealing with a company that controls 40% of your economy?
Let me go back to the 2016. 2016 isn't a continuation of the 1919 contract. It's a renewal of it, right? Now that 1999 contract expired. The then government had a choice to make. Do I renew this or do I get a new contract? I know the government sought advice and got advice, and this is after the discovery of Lisa 1. Oil was discovered in June 2015 when the contract expired subsequently. The government knew and had choices to make and chose to go with those terms, which, as you say, reflect almost verbatim the 1919 agreement, except for some small things. So that was a choice. Now, the question you're asking is, can the government now go back and say, I don't like these terms, I want something else? And as you know,
I wouldn't put it in those terms. Can the government go back and say, look, we want to invoke the renegotiation clause in the contract?
So if there's a clause in the contract that provides for renegotiation,
It does, as you know, it does.
absolutely the government can do that. Right? The government can do it. Yeah. So it you know, there's one thing, Christopher, that I've seen lacking in politicians and my part of the pond in Trinidad and Tobago when facing big multinational companies. It's actually three things. There's backbone, and more backbone. That is lacking, right? So it's not knowing what's right, not knowing how to do it, it's not knowing getting it done. It's having the will and the confidence to stand up and do it. And that's my view in Trinidad. Whether or not that's the same thing in Guyana, you have to know. So the point you're asking is this: if there's a provision in the contract for renegotiation, and if events have shown the contract not to be just, then every contract, as you know as a lawyer better than I do, Chris, every contract presumes some level of justice. And if the question is in the contract, if things have changed materially from when the contract was drawn up, and changes have made it more unjust or grossly unjust, then there may be a basis for renegotiating. Having said that, companies always renegotiate, always ask for changes. Now, we know, for instance, that there were points in time when there should have been relinquishments. Were those used or were those extended? The fact that they were extended means there was a renegotiation. Every time there's a renegotiation,
by default.
No. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is for it to become valid, right? It means somebody agreed. Yeah. So therefore, and as you and I know, once you're renegotiating, then the other party has the option to ask for a quid pro quo. So I'm giving you this, what do I get in return? So companies ask for what they want because they have the backbone to ask.
That's what negotiation is about. Negotiation is about both parties putting the position. I want to take you up on this, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
You said the government had a choice.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of Dennison, the director, JGMC director.
Mm-hmm.
His report when he went to Texas, they almost they twisted his arm and said, look, we're not discussing anything. You have to give us a new contract. And Sir Sridhar Ramphal, a great Guyanese, made perhaps the worst mistake in it. He created a bridging deed, which is why I'm saying that it is just a continuation. Call it what you will. There's a bridging deed that links the 2016 to the 2019. So yes, President David Granger should have stood up at that time, stand up for Guyana. He didn't. But is it too late? Is it too late now to renegotiate?
It's not. It's not too late to renegotiate. In addition to which, the Exxon and any operator has to get different government permissions to do further work, whether it's approval of a field development plan, a permit to build a pipeline, all these things, the government can attach conditions, right? And those conditions can claw back value if the government was so inclined. Now, you said something interesting there. I mentioned earlier that one of the recommendations I made in my 2016 report is the government should put in place this committee of parliament. And they did. And the committee included the then former Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan, and they called the then Minister of Natural Resources, Mr. Trotman, before it. And it's on the record. The committee, in fact, Mr. Jordan himself, a member of parliament, a cabinet minister, alongside Minister Jordan, Minister Trotman asked him the question, Minister, why did you agree to these terms? Very pointedly. And the answer was, I was so instructed.
Right. All right.
That's very telling, right?
Now, let's get down to your experience. You've operated in many countries. Are you aware of countries in which petroleum contracts, with the same kind of stability clause, but with a renegotiation clause, are you aware of countries that have renegotiated their contracts?
I am. I mean,
and can you give me a couple of examples?
Sure. There was a strong case in Tanzania where they used a term, I forget the term, but it really term these contracts are, I mean, really, it gave the sense, these contracts, really bad contracts, and they're renegotiated. And sometimes what governments do, if you can't renegotiate, now it's tricky because sometimes arbitration can work against you. All contracts say you must obey the prevailing law, right? And in case of dispute, the law overrides the contract. So some countries have been able to fix areas that are gray areas that are uncertain by either changing laws, implementing new laws. What happens in Guyana's case is that the contracts were taken before Parliament to be ratified. So the contracts have the effect of law, which basically ties Guyana's feet around how it might introduce new laws. And that's me as a layman saying this. As a lawyer, you might know better, right? Around how changes in law might affect
I don't
contracts.
think it's correct to say that the contract was not taken to Parliament. In fact, it took over a year after the contract had been signed that they released the contract to the public. What was taken to the Parliament was an order relating to the tax concessions, which is what the paper required.
Which is basically what you want to negotiate, right?
Yes. Well, I think there are several aspects you want to renegotiate.
Okay.
I was just looking at the Kaicho News. The Senegal today reports terminates concessions for several others as contract review on the way.
Yeah. Now, several countries have done that. It doesn't always end well for the state. I mean, Venezuela did it, for instance, and you see the pressure brought on them. It just depends on the timing and the way it's done, the legal system, and how strong the government is.
And we are saying utilize the provision of the contract that allows for renegotiation. You cannot have a third-rate man who is a branch head telling you we will not renegotiate the contract. He doesn't speak for Guyana. He speaks for himself. Now, as you know, the government's new mantra is sanctity of contract. And there's the US ambassador is talking about safeguard for investment stability and becoming and that type of thing. Do you believe that sanctity of contract must prevail over sovereignty, over the natural resources of a country?
So like I say, must be a just contract, right? The contract and the oversight of the contract must be done in the country's best interest, right? Now, if, for instance, that contract and the operations of it don't serve the country's best interest or work against the country's best interest, then there's a break. The question you're really asking is how do we fix it? I mean, I get from what I've read and seen from you and others is that people are not happy with the contract, or conditions in the contract, but I've been asking to have it renegotiated in some specific terms and not getting response. So the question for you, Chris, to put you on the spot here is, are you satisfied that the areas for renegotiation are specific enough that the demands being made in the government are clear enough to say, I want this item renegotiated, and this is the direction in which I want it to go? Because there's a lot of talk about renegotiating, and you have done a really good job at capturing many of these individual pieces. The question in my mind is, are those 2 or 3 major items clear in the minds of every Guyanese? Is it this is what you want renegotiated?
Well, I can't speak. I'll speak on behalf of every Guyanese. What I can say, there are some areas, and if you were to follow, and the Kaicho News has carried on a great national campaign when it comes to fighting for equity. The issues are royalty. Now, royalties is one of the lowest royalty rates in the world. As you said, Tony, this here is an irreplaceable resource. When it's gone forever. And you give it up for 1%. The threshold for profit share, 75%. They're repaying the taxes for these people. I mean, come on. This is not 1950 or 1850. This is 2026. And our president cannot see, for all his patriotism and all his international campaigning, he cannot see that those are things that worry people, and they translate into real money. They translate into more pension. We have one of the lowest minimum private sector wage in the world that is encouraging trafficking in people. So to answer your question, not too briefly, Tony, there's only 34 clauses, I think, articles in the contract. You can take 4, you can take 6, and sit down, and in a couple of days, you can, if there is goodwill on both sides, but what you have is greed being manifested.
Chris, you hit the nail on the head. 75% of that money that comes from the sale of oil goes into paying costs, right? Do you know that ultimately oil and gas companies use 80% of the revenue to pay for goods and services? 75% is the cap, right? Now, here's the thing. And here's where I tried and got some traction, but I think there needs to be some more traction in Guyana. That 80% goes to third-party contractors, right? Guyana is trying to claw that back through local content. In other words, get some local companies to get some of that 80%. Has anybody looked at where is that 80% going? It's going to building FPSOs. How much of that is staying in Guyana? Right? Now, here's the thing, Chris. When these companies provide these services, they get paid. And you know what they pay in taxes? They pay withholding tax. What is that in Guyana? 10%, 5%? What if they establish a parent company in Barbados or St. Lucia? You know what withholding taxes? 0. Meanwhile, Guyanese companies providing services, how much tax do they pay?
Their tax, that's absolutely.
Now, you're an accountant, you know tax, right? Why doesn't Guyana require that every company, every provider who provides services for Guyana, Guyanese companies, for more than 180 days per year, be registered in Guyana and be liable for tax in Guyana? Why don't they say for every contract above $1 million, $2 million, that's also a requirement? These are tax laws, right? Those are things you can do outside the existing contract without violating the contract. And you can claw back a lot of value. Because you're a lawyer, you're an accountant. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah. So we agree then, the question you had asked me, Tony, we've agreed that there are some very specific action that the government can take. Now, let's move on. When this contract was signed, and as 1999, 2016, they did not seem to be a particularly strong emphasis on gas. Now, as you know, the contract provides for associated and unassociated gas, non-associated gas. It also talks about developing new agreements and arrangements. Do you think, in terms of the transparency and accountability, we are managing and administering this contract in a transparent way when it comes to gas? And I would ask you to refer that to the gas to energy project that is going on.
Sure. So again, I go back to this 2016 report I did, and in that, I made a very clear point that oil and gas are different and need to be managed differently, and gas has to be prepared for. The basic difference is simple enough to explain. One, you can bring oil out of the gas, out of the ground, you can put it in the tanker and ship it away, no problem. Natural gas, you can't do that. Natural gas, you have to process it in some way, right? Which requires infrastructure to receive it, to process it. If it's liquefaction, if it's manufacturing, if it's power, you need pipeline. Those things take time. Those things need coordination for you to get done. I know this because Trinidad went through that. And in doing that, Trinidad did a great job early organizing these things in synchronicity. Now, people see Trinidad today and look at the state we're in of decline and say we shouldn't follow Trinidad, forgetting that Trinidad is coming off a high. How did we get on that high? What are the things we did well? And I've written a few articles recently in Kaiju News on the difference between oil and natural gas and why Guyana needs to be prepared for natural gas. Now, as we know, the Wales project has gone into long overdue in terms of timing, high cost overruns. That to me is great lessons for Guyana to learn from. One thing you mentioned about transparency, and I said earlier that one good thing Guyana did in transparency is putting the contracts online. You have called on others for transparency on that gas to energy contract. One question that comes to mind is gas contracts and gas pipelines in particular are quite unique. Gas pipelines are utilities in a sense. Gas pipelines are typically easy to get finance. Why? Because you're not financing a pipeline, unless you have a guaranteed off-taker, right?
Yes.
That guaranteed off-taker and that guaranteed contract ensures the lender that they will get repaid. Typically, a pipeline contract like that, any utility contract has two components. You have a fee you pay for having access to the utility, in this case, the pipeline, and you have an additional fee you pay for actually using it. In jargon, it's called a take-or-pay contract, meaning you can either take gas through the pipeline and pay me for what you take, and that cost includes a cost for having it available, or even if you don't take, you still pay me for having it available. So the question to me is, we know, and we've been told, that the pipeline from Stabroek Field to Wales is being cost recovered from the lease of production. The question is, for transparency, does that contract include a take-or-pay clause? Meaning, the pipeline is built, it's ready, it's commissioned, right? Therefore, the contractor has built the contract and the pipeline and met its end of the deal. Now, the off-taker is a year plus behind schedule. In that year, is the off-taker paying take-or-pay or not? Now, that is something that transparency will tell you, and because it's Guyanese money paying it, Guyanese have the right to ask the question, are we paying for the pipeline being available? And if not, what is the mechanism for it? Because it may be hidden in the language of the contract. So well as better than I do that the language of a contract can say things in ways that people like you need to unravel it.
Now, would it be fair to say that this contract, this 2016 contract, petroleum agreement, was essentially a petroleum contract? And what has happened, we have now discovered a considerable amount of associated gas. In your experience, have you seen any change in attitude on how we have adapted to this new environment of this vast quantity and volume of gas? And how would you recommend we deal with it?
Sure. So for one thing, the 1999 contract was an oil contract. In those days, and even now, multinational companies do not go into countries new to oil and gas to look for gas. There's no market. Under the laws of the Securities Exchange Commission, you cannot book natural gas reserves you discovered unless you have an approved project. An approved project can take years to materialize. So you don't want to spend money, find gas.
You're saying approved gas project?
Yes. Yes, right? So the reserves that have been found can't be booked, right? So companies will avoid drilling for gas. If they find it, they might not even declare it because it doesn't make sense, right? So the contract was an oil contract. The question you're saying now is, now that we found gas, what should we do differently? And the situation Guyana is facing is unique to Guyana. I'm seeing the same thing evolving in Suriname and across the way in Namibia. Oil brings money quickly if it's developed like that. That quick money changes people's behaviors and attitudes in government. When it's Christopher, when you're a poor country, you're very diligent about what you do. When money starts flowing in, people move away from feeding the goose to eating the egg. Right?
Is that what you call the resource? Is that what you call the resource curse? Is that a symptom of the resource curse?
That's a symptom of it. Yeah, that's a symptom of it. So the governance moves away from oversight to using the money, because the only problem with resources like this is that the money comes from without effort by the citizens. So governments may tend to think they don't owe the citizens anything. They're not paying me taxes, right? And they believe that they own the oil and gas. It's up to the citizens now to assert their right as owners of the resources to say, this is how we want the resource used. Now, that was Trinidad's problem. Anyway, in fact, it was the problem of all our countries post-independence. You know well as well as I do that our post-independence leaders, whether it was Caribbean or Africa, were nationalists. They were there to build our countries. They focused on that. Those who came later reaping the windfall. There's a saying, Christopher, that says, hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make hard times.
Would you say that that's beginning to appear like Guyana?
That's what's happening in Trinidad. That's where Trinidad going through.
I'm asking you about Guyana.
So when if I were to compare Trinidad trajectory to Guyana, Trinidad went through a period where there was measured thinking and structured investment. The oil companies didn't build our gas industry, They were happy to flare it. The Trinidad government took a decision to take the money from oil windfall and invest in pipeline, invest in power plant, invest in iron and steel, invest in ammonia and methanol, invest in ports. That wasn't built by foreigners, That was built by us, right? The companies kept saying, this is not commercial, this can't make money. Leave it in the ground or flare it, right? Because in their portfolio, Christopher, this is not the best place to spend money. They manage their portfolio to make the most money as soon as they can. They will produce oil. They will leave gas in the ground. They will tell the government it isn't commercial. Unless the government has the capacity to assess it himself, the backbone to negotiate properly and to get it done.
I like your word. Couldn't they? Let's look at that scenario. That's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Couldn't the government say, okay, Exxon, Chevron, CNOOC, you want to concentrate on ongoing, but we will take control and we will develop the gas. Is that an option for us?
Well, it may be if the government has the credit worthiness to borrow the money needed and to raise the capital, or to say, I will negotiate independent deals with downstream off-takers. If I were to interpret what was said by the country manager at the last conference, I think he was saying that. He was saying, we'll bring the gas, but Guyana has to build the infrastructure, build the plants, build the off-take. So the question, therefore, you're asking is, should Guyana build it? And that goes into two parts. Should Guyana build it itself or facilitate it being built by other investors? And I think the answer is yes to both. Well, whichever is best to Guyana. Yeah.
And I will go a little before that and say, let us negotiate very clearly this arrangement about gas in this 2016 agreement, which does say that you have to do that.
So beyond that, before Guyana gets a negotiation with anybody else, Guyana needs to negotiate it with itself. Guyana needs to understand, what do we have under the ground? What is the shape of that? Is it, as you said, associated gas, non-associated? Is it gas condensate? What's the best way to get it out? What's the best pace at which to get it out? To build the infrastructure that can be getting optimized. So Guyana's built a small pipeline to bring a small amount of gas ashore. That costs a lot of money. Guyana has a lot more gas. Who's thinking about managing the reservoirs so you get more gas out rather than leaving oil in the ground? So you use the infrastructure. If Guyana to develop a robust natural gas master plan that considers these things, then Guyana is managing its portfolio. The multinationals manage their portfolio globally, but who's managing Guyana's portfolio?
And your answer to that question would be what? Who's managing Guyana?
So probably, like most countries without capacity to negotiate or to understand the technical parts, governments respond to investors who have more power in terms of knowledge, information, ability to negotiate. So in negotiation 101 tells you, if you want to win a negotiation, go into the room with your draft, right? Don't respond to somebody. So in other words, know what you want. And as a sovereign state, Guyana has the power to do that by putting policies in place, by putting in place legislation as to the use of gas, for instance, how gas can be treated. Those things can be put into law and not work against any contract. With smart lawyers like you, Christopher, Guyana can draft these laws. What is Guyana's natural gas law? Right? Is there one?
No, no.
I rest my case.
You rest your case. No,
Your Honor.
this business of a petroleum commission,
Mhm.
the government of Guyana
Mhm.
had promised one. In fact, there was universal approval by the coalition government. What's your view on the petroleum commission?
So government plays different roles in the oil and gas sector. Typically, government plays the role of the policymaker and lawmaker. It plays the role of a regulator, and it plays the role sometimes of an operator or joint partner. Guyana chose not to have an operating company, a state company. I think that's a mistake, right? But that's Guyana's choice, and I respect that. No problems at all, right? In terms of the regulator, Trinidad and Tobago has a ministry that acts as both policymaker and regulator. I think that's a mistake too. Why? Because regulators need strong technical people with good instruments, whether it's technology or processes and so on. And unfortunately, government ministries are unable to retain people with that capability because of the pay structure in the states, in the civil public service. So what countries have done? Norway did it. Norway from the regulator. Nigeria copied it. Nigeria from the regulator. Ghana's constitution actually requires it. In Ghana, the constitution says all natural resources must have an independent regulator. And it describes the competencies required, the nature of the board, and so on, right? The reason for that is that you can get people to work in the regulator who have technical experience at the level required to stand up to those companies. That is why you require. That's why I've encouraged Trinidad for years to put one in place, but Trinidad hasn't. Right? And the problem really is public officials don't like to see public officers getting paid more than them. Right? But these are the people who are guaranteeing and ensuring that revenue comes into the country and not be lost. So the question I always ask is, you know how much it costs to have these officials, these people working for you? Do you know how much it costs not to have them working for you?
Not to have them, exactly.
Yeah. So that is it. So I think unless Guyana can find a way to pay its people in the Ministry of Resources well, right? I think having that regulatory function captured in law, because at the moment the law doesn't have many regulations around it, right? And those regulations are what you can legislate policy, Christopher, but you can't legislate activities. You have to regulate activities. And the regulations and the regulator is where the commission comes in.
It's been we've been producing oil now for 5 years. We have been in the business for many, many more years. What are some of the institutions and perhaps technical systems we ought to have had in place as of today, which we don't have?
Right. Sad to say, I mean, so many things I recommended back then. I'm not saying I know the answers, don't get me wrong. No, but basic things, right? You have to understand the operations of the companies, what's involved. You have to understand what's below the ground, the reservoirs, how they behave, how they respond to wells being drilled and so on. You have to understand the commercial aspects of it. Let me give you an example. A company will come and say, I want a field development plan approved. What's involved in a field development plan? It's understanding the reservoir. How do you understand that? You take seismic data, 3D seismic data, you map that, you understand how the bodies underground are set up. Then you do reservoir modeling. How do the fluids flow, special changes and so on. Then you decide where to put the wells. So you get the best, where the best delivery from the wells you put, say, least number of wells. And if you have to re-inject, where you re-inject. You need good understanding of the subsurface drilling and completions. And then you need to understand the equipment that goes on top of the ground, the things on the seafloor, the control systems, the FPSO, right? You have to understand the physical infrastructure on that, the operations on that. And
it's people who would understand those things. Do we have the structure and the people to understand those things?
No. Let me tell you why I say that. You have good people. You have knowledgeable people. The question is, have they got the capacity to do what they want? And capacity has several aspects of it. And we often confuse capability with capacity. We may say this guy did a degree, he has a PhD, he understands reservoir engineering. Has he managed reservoirs? Has he worked reservoirs? If you have somebody doing that, is he also looking at the FPSO and the wells? Is he also looking at the health and safety aspects of it? Is he looking at the commercial aspect of it? So he may have some capability. Can he do all of those in one day? So the question is, have you got the capacity? And capacity is a quantitative measure.
And this is not something you learn on the job. You have to bring in that skill. You have to bring in that capacity.
Yeah. So in Trinidad and Tobago, when we started the industry, when we became independent, one of the first things Eric Williams did, he said, we need to understand this industry and set up the infrastructure, the regulatory framework in place to manage this. You know what he did? He brought in two gentlemen, one from Iran and one from Austria. Both of them were heads of the national oil companies. The Iranian national company was an E&P company. The Austrian national company was a refining company. So he brought in world-leading people to analyze our country's resources and, importantly, to understand what we wanted out of the industry. And based on that, they were asked to say, tell us how we need to regulate it. But before you do that, make sure it aligns with our national development objectives. So that clarity of vision and purpose and bringing expert help in is absolutely essential.
And that's the kind of function that the Petroleum Commission would perform.
So once it's up and running, absolutely. But the commission needs to build people, needs to build process, needs to have technology and so on, right? And that's where you might need initial help to design that and put it in place. The Norwegians did a good job doing that for several countries in Africa at one point. They stopped doing it, when Guyana came on because of this climate change thing where they decided they're not going to support oil and gas anymore. But many countries got help from other countries doing that. The Norwegians were good at that. They had a fund dedicated just to that. And they brought in people who were practitioners. Other countries get advisors from aid agencies, World Bank, and they tend to bring in academics without the deep technical knowledge. And that doesn't always give you the right solutions you're looking for.
Tony, you have previously raised concerns about whether pipeline obligations may involve take or pay. In fact, you said that on this program, or long-term financial commitments. What is that? Why is that distinction so important for taxpayers, electricity consumers, and the state itself?
So, it's specifically on take or pay. If you're paying but not taking, it means you're paying for something you're not using, right? You're not using the gas, right? So the question is, what happens to that gas? Now, the government may say, okay, fine, I won't take the gas, right? If the gas is free, fine, it's my gas anyway. If I have to pay for that gas, I want you to bank that gas for me. In other words, in the future, I will take that gas for free. The question that you should be asking, Chris, is, does the contract allow for that? First of all, and maybe you know the answer, is that gas free gas? In other words, is it paid for, right? And if it is, right, then is that gas not taken? Is that banked, right? Because you're paying for something that you're not getting. So I don't know that answers the question, but that is the consideration.
If you have a take or pay,
yeah,
one of the things you will do is you make sure that you use, because you have to pay anyway. Yeah. And it becomes its own condition, its own driver.
Yeah. Well, so I think, and that's why I said earlier that the Whales project is a good learning experience for Guyana. One of the things you would have learned is that the land on the Whales wasn't suitable for the plants to be placed on it. And therefore, the engineering work that had to be done beforehand should have been done more robustly. Then you have the pipeline is finished, but the plants aren't ready. So therefore, the scheduling of contracts and those things had to be important. In a case like that, you have multiple projects with different individuals delivering it. The question for you is, did Guyana have the capacity to oversee this program in a very strong project management way? to ensure that these things are aligned in schedule and delivery. Who, for instance, was ensuring that when vessels were bringing equipment in, that you didn't double up on cost because two people were bringing in boats on the same day from the same place, paying twice the transport costs. Who was managing those scheduling? That's a role in project management, right? Does Guyana have that project management capacity if Guyana was in fact coordinating these three separate projects? The things I think are lessons that would have been learned, like whether or not the lessons are carried forward is where the judgment really should come.
I want to switch a little bit to the Natural Resource Fund. You know about it, you know how it operates.
Yeah.
It's almost upfront. You have to get much more than 4 billion before much is left in the fund. Does that methodology, does that emphasis front-end spending, does it lead to inefficiencies and wastage?
And Chris, you know this as well as I do. There are different kinds of funds, right? The question really to be asked is, what is the purpose of this fund? And from that, build the mechanism to ensure it
No,
works.
but I'm telling you what our fund is.
Yeah. So
we have a given. We have a given.
So okay, back to that. So I'm saying, no, if Guyana wants to use the fund to support the budget, that's fine. If Guyana wants to use the fund to supplement the budget in times when the resource price is low, that's also fine. The question is, does Guyana have a desire to invest in Guyana for the future and to save for the future? And then the question is, what is the mechanism by which the amount used in these three buckets? Four buckets: support the budget, supplement the budget, save and invest. What's the mechanism for that? And politicians oftentimes fudge it, right, to suit their own short-term purposes. Unless the rules are clear, unless the oversight is clear, and unless the people of the country who own that resource can see their interest in it, it can be manipulated. Do you know, if I ask you, what is the best sovereign wealth fund in the world, what would you tell me? In terms of size?
You've got a few. Of course, Norway is Saudi Arabia.
All right. Do you know Norway does not have a sovereign wealth fund?
Well, it's not called a sovereign wealth fund. That's correct.
And do you know why it's not called a sovereign wealth fund?
I don't.
Well, I spoke to the minister because back in the early 2000s, I was looking for information on it, and I couldn't find it. And I met a gentleman who was a former minister of finance at the time this was set up, and he said we call it the Norwegian Pension Fund.
Yes, that's correct.
He said we know our government would not mess with it, but we couldn't be guaranteed that future governments might not. So once you call it a pension fund, it means every single Norwegian has a vested interest in it. And they know that their pension depends on it. Now, Trinidad is struggling to maintain our pension fund, our national insurance pension fund, right? Now, have we been putting money into that fund as a pension fund, then people would have paid attention.
You call yours the Heritage Fund, or do you call yours?
We call it the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. There are two factors: heritage, which means you save and invest; stabilization, which is stabilize the budget. Governments traditionally have been fudging it. The way it works is that if your revenue exceeds the amount projected based on the price of oil you use in your budget, then you put the excess or some of the excess into the fund. However, if it falls below the projected price, then you can draw down on the fund to supplement the budget. What governments have done is fix the budget price at some number, which typically looks like a working backwards and not necessarily linked to any reality. So the law missed a beat. The law could have said, and this is the mechanism by which the price to be used will be set. Right? So therefore you have to have clarity on the pieces that go into making the law effective. And I think that might be something that you can look at to see whether those things fit. That's why I asked you the first question: what is the purpose? And whether or not the law is meeting that purpose.
Well, the purpose, what would you assume a purpose to be? You said that this here is a resource that belongs to future generations,
Yeah.
not as current generations.
Yeah.
So, and if future generation, if existing generation
Yeah.
were to consume, were to exploit it and leave nothing, they should at least leave some assets represented by that. That's the essence of a sovereign wealth fund, because it has an intergenerational impact.
Yep. I mean, so the question is, how much of that fund goes into national development, true national development, the infrastructure, assets, healthcare, the things that can improve the quality of life for current generations and future generations. And that's typically what you're looking for. If it's just a supplementary budget and budget expenditure is not properly managed, then is it actually working well for future generations?
Let's turn to some lessons from Trinidad and Tobago. And this is where you're an expert. What did Trinidad get right? And what did it get wrong? What are the lessons we can learn from Trinidad?
So, go back to the beginning. Trinidad and Tobago came at this from a national development perspective. When Eric Williams invited these two gentlemen and put together a commission with local people, their mandate was, how do we get the most out of our resources under the ground? In other words, how do you make this country attractive always to have investors trying to get oil and gas out of the ground? How do we make sure we get our fair share of it? How do we ensure that our people get well-paid jobs? How do we make sure we get more value from the oil to refining? In 1963, he asked the question, how do we get more from our natural gas?
But we're beyond some of those points, and the time against us. So what are the lessons?
So coming out of
where
that,
we are now, what are the lessons?
Right. So coming out of that was good institutions, good legislation, good regulations. What happened, Christopher, is that over time, because the conditions change, we didn't amend those legislations, we didn't strengthen institutions. So keeping an eye on what you need, its circumstances, and getting that correct fit purpose, I think is the most important lesson. And important in that is, again, good governance, transparency, accountability, good legislation, good institution, accountability, transparency. Those are the lessons that Trinidad and Tobago missed. And at the moment, we have decisions made by government, regardless of party, that don't always work in the national interest.
What specific errors did Trinidad and Tobago make that you would warn Guyana not to repeat?
The way we spend money. The money we spend in our budgets, we haven't got the capacity to manage spending well. Managing big money, as you know, Christopher, if you were to build $1 million house and you had a local fellow build it for you, you can manage him. If you decide you're going to build a $5 million place and you get a big contractor to do it, can you manage him yourself?
He manages
probably
you.
Not. Right? Exactly, right? So building the capacity to manage the money spend isn't a part of what Trinidad did really badly. It's been a lot of money, and a lot of money is wasted. And of course, the other kind of where money goes without accountability is in people's pockets and not where it's supposed to go. So managing, again, always making sure that the laws and the way the laws are implemented and overseen, regulated, public oversight is number one. Getting that right is number one.
Is that, because my question was, what mistakes did Trinidad make that we must avoid? Are you saying?
What the mistake Trinidad made is we trusted our technocrats. Because they were smart people, smarter than us. They knew what they were doing. They appeared to be, and they were initially working in the public interest, and we let them do what they want to without accounting to us, right? Over time, those individuals went away. The systems were never there to protect new entrants, protect us from new entrants. So what Trinidad did is we can trust people, but we must be able to verify what they're doing. So that, to me, is the biggest mistake we made. We didn't put things to verify that people we trusted were doing the right things.
Well, Tony, before I thank you for appearing on this program on behalf of OGGN, I must ask you this final question. If you had the opportunity to meet the president and the vice president and the Minister of Natural Resources, these are the key people in the natural resource sector. What are the 3 recommendations or cautions or whatever you want to call it that you would say to them, look, get this right?
I would say first, create and fund a world-class oil and gas regulatory capability now. Not as a symbolic agency, but a technically staffed institution with reservoir, drilling, facilities, commercial, environmental, legal, and audit expertise. That's critical. Two, develop and publish a national natural gas policy. Before locking the country into additional pipelines, power plants, and downstream commitments, get that policy correct. It must address, like I said, the reservoir management, how you manage that gas, pricing, cost recovery, ownership, domestic use, industrialization, electricity tariffs, environmental risk, long-term fiscal value. You must have that. And the third thing I would say is to treat local content as transformation, not participation. I think the government of Guyana got caught up in jobs, right? There's more available in local content. The goal is not simply for Guyanese workers and companies to get small contracts. The goal should be to build Guyanese capability, creditworthy firms, capital markets, technical skills, institutions that survive beyond oil and gas. This is not logic for local content framework. Jobs should lead to world-class businesses. World-class businesses should lead to a more efficient and more reliant company and economy. A closing line, Christopher, is Guyana's danger. It's not that it has oil and gas, we know that. Guyana's danger is that the projects may mature faster than the state matures. The national task now is to make the state mature faster than the projects. The state is lagging behind the projects, and the country will not catch up unless the state takes a concerted effort to get ahead of the contracts, the projects. And that to me is my biggest worry about Guyana. I have not seen movement in the depth of capacity in the ministry, in the GGMC. There's some people who've nodded, but I don't see it coming out in the way the public perception of the industry comes over.
Well, Mr. Anthony Paul, Senior Policy and Strategy Advisor to governments across the world on energy. I want to say thank you very much for making yourself available and to answer our questions and pointing us in Guyana in the right direction. So again, on behalf to you, to Josh, Kaiju Radio, Kaiju News Radio, and to the viewers who will eventually see this program, let me say what a pleasure it has been. And I thank OGGN for that opportunity. Thank you again and good night.
Thank you very much.